Okay, I'm going to react here and break down this recent video just a couple days ago that Rollo Tomassi did on his show, The Rational Male, with Michael Sartain, with this author by the name of Richard Reeves here. Let's just get right into it. I got a lot to say. This is probably going to be in several parts. I actually just did an hour and 47 minutes of this, and come to find out my microphone was not working. So this is the second time around, which is probably good because an hour and 47 minutes was too long. I'd have to probably break it up, so I'll probably just try to do this in smaller sections because I got a lot to say on this, and I think it's very, very illustrative and really important in this conversation about what's going on in this conversation of feminism and men's issues, and the so-called experts that are weighing in supposedly to be on our side, which are anything but. So I want to start with this guy here. As you can see, the title of the video that Rollo did is Masculinity in Crisis. Now this guy, Richard Reeves here, I have his Wikipedia page brought up. This is very key to understand who you're talking about and what these guys represent and what point of view they come from. So he is a talking head from academia. You can see he's originally British. He is a British-American writer and scholar and a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and director of the Future of the Middle Class Initiative. Keep this all in mind as we go through this. I'm going to keep on repeating it. Of who these people report to be and the positions that they're taking involved in this conversation. Now, we're going to go over here after we talk a little bit about his page and talk about the Brookings Institute. Because if you're not familiar with these institutes, these are think tanks. There's many of them. There's the RAND Corporation, Heritage Foundation. They're escaping me right now, but there's lots. You can just do a search on them. But let's get to his page here first. Okay. So career starts here in the summer of 2010. He left Demos, whoever that is. I think they might touch on it here later on. And he worked for the government of the United Kingdom. He joined the office of the Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg, a Liberal Democrat, as his special advisor. 2012, Reeves urged the Liberal Democrats to choose to become a radical centrist political party. In quotes, a hard-driving radical liberal party of the political center. Okay, now you're going to come across this with these people constantly, and you're going to come across this in this discussion/interview of the kind of Marxist doublespeak that they use. So what does this really say? Of course, this is very brief. It's just on Wikipedia. But if he urges the Liberal Democrats to choose to become a radical centrist political party, what is a radical centrist party? I mean, why is this worth mentioning that he urged them? Is this a casual conversation that they had over lunch? Is that believable? What does urging him to do this? Now, when you take it into context of who he is and that he is currently a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, we're going to see about this Brookings Institution. They are kind of arguably maybe the biggest hitter in think tanks. These are institutions that form the political thought of the ruling class. So I would say that urging, if you really looked into what took place here, this is something like writing policy papers. It's basically, having followed this type of stuff for a long time, when you see this type of talk, it talks radical to me. This is somebody that is trying to radicalize something. And look at the doublespeak. How could you be a radical centrist party that is hard-driving, radical liberal party of the political center? Well, how can you be a radical liberal party of the political center if we're assuming that the liberalism they're talking about is anything like the liberalism/progressivism that we're seeing today? You're not going to be in the center. But of course, for those of you familiar with the Overton window, the way the political discourse has been pushed so far these days, there really is no conservatism of yesteryear left at all. even amongst the so-called conservatives. Compared to maybe 50 years ago, even conservatives would be considered pretty solidly or even far left, with the center left as basically being Marxist and the far left being hardcore communist, radical, revolutionary Marxist. But anyway, not to get too bogged down in this, let's keep on going. Until 2012, Reeves was Director of Strategy to the Deputy Prime Minister of Nick Clegg. Previously, he had been the director of the London-based think tank Demos. So that's who he left. He left Demos in 2010 from up here. So he was with another think tank across the pond. He has held positions including Director of Futures at the Work Foundation, a British nonprofit organization, Society Editor of The Observer, Economics Correspondent and Washington Correspondent of The Guardian, and Policy Advisor to Frank Field when he was Minister for Welfare Reform. There you go. Policy Advisor. Now, this is just what's on record. But I'm going to also show you here a brief clip of Hillary Clinton that was circulating many years ago, where she's talking about how she and the government works hand in hand with the Council on Foreign Relations, which is another think tank. It's not the Brookings Institute. It doesn't really matter. They're all the same. It depends on the party, and it depends on the information, what they're looking for. So once again, keep this in mind when we go back to the conversation that is basically peddled or presented as, here we have this academic author that works for the Brookings Institute, but everybody just kind of bypasses over that. I used to too for many years. I didn't have any idea what they were talking about. But when this starts to get onto your radar and you start to see and pay attention to these names, even in documentaries that you watch, different programs, commercials, you will see these recognitions come up for these foundations and think tanks that are heavily funded behind these works with academics like this guy right here. So he has come out. The reason that he's on this podcast with Rollo is that he has recently released a book. Let's scroll down to here and take a look. He's written several books, but the latest one is here on September 22nd, 2020. He released the book of Boys and Men, Why the Modern Male is Struggling, Why It Matters, and What to Do About It. That's what this whole conversation is about. And as I started to say, that's the way the discussion in the interview is basically presented. Here's an academic guy. He's very smart. Did a deep dive, and he's going to talk about the issues with boys and men. And of course, what's the implication? He's here to help. He's got great information, going to tell us all the problems and what he suggests the solutions may be, etc. And when we get to the interview, you are going to see of how it is just obfuscations, admissions, ignoring the 800-pound gorilla in the room constantly. It really is a piece of work. But let's see anything else. Okay, so once again, this guy's very high profile, right? Reeves appears regularly on radio and television as a political commentator. He writes for a variety of publications, including the New York Times, The Atlantic, The Guardian, The Observer. He's also a regular contributor to the online think tank section of the Wall Street Journal. Okay, in 2005, he co-presented a 4-part BBC series, Making Slow Happy. He regularly writes for British newspapers, etc. So you get this is not some obscure guy in any way, shape, or form. Very connected to the powers that be. So let's take a look at the Brookings Institute that he currently works for. And he is a senior fellow. Now, I'll freely admit, much to my embarrassment, that to this day I don't exactly understand what a senior fellow is, and I wouldn't be surprised if even the senior fellows don't know exactly what they are. But he's definitely not mopping floors over there at the Brookings Institution, I can tell you that. I would say he's got some rank as a senior fellow. I think that you all would probably agree. So, the Brookings Institution, often stylized as simply Brookings, is an American research group founded in 1916, located on Think Tank Row in Washington, D.C. Okay, so picture this. You can see a picture of the building right here. On Think Tank Row, that's where they have all of these deals lined up. And this is where all of the talking heads that are in front of us, the politicians, the media people, they go to get their intellectual talking points and policy to form the culture and the thought of all of us today. As you can see, exactly that. The organization conducts research and education in the social sciences, primarily in economics and tax policy, metropolitan policy, governance, foreign policy, global economy, and economic development. Its stated mission is to provide innovative and practical recommendations that advance three broad goals: strengthen American democracy. How often have we been hearing this these days? Make your own decisions on that one. Foster the economic and social welfare, security, and opportunity of all Americans, and secure a more open, safe, prosperous, and cooperative international system. Now, I don't know about you all, but all of that reads as social justice. And if you're not familiar with the Marxist talking points, that's exactly how it reads. Now you take a look down here, you'll see that this Brookings Institute is global. You can get the page up for yourself, read it if you want. They're in Beijing, China. They're in Qatar, New Delhi, India, in China. Here it says, the University of Pennsylvania's Global Go-To Think Tank Index report has named Brookings Think Tank of the Year and top think tank in the world every year since 2008. The Economist describes Brookings as perhaps America's most prestigious think tank. Okay? And then look down here. Okay, so then they go on to talk about in the final paragraph on this part. We're not going to go through all of this. This is enough right here until we get onto the interview. They state that its staff represent diverse points of view and describes itself as nonpartisan. And various media outlets have variously described Brookings as centrist, center-left, liberal, or right-wing. So they're completely fair according to them. Completely fair and balanced. An academic analysis of congressional records from 1993 to 2002 found Brookings was cited by conservative politicians almost as often by liberal. So in other words, a right center down the road where the fairest ever may be. But just look at what we just looked at over there. Total globalist. Locations all around the world. These statements read almost like out of a Black Lives Matter social justice guide. And just knowing the whole environment of the media and academia and the culture today, being located in Washington, D.C., I think that, in all honesty, it's not any proof. It's just my opinion, having followed this for so long, that this last paragraph here, you might as well just throw out. It's just thrown in there to put in a disclaimer that although this all reads that we are very far left and involved in deep social engineering for socialist, Marxist goals, we're really actually quite fair. And one last thing on here that I just thought was kind of humorous. Who knows? Take it for what it's worth. It's something on Wikipedia. But they say their revenue here is $86 million a year, and their expenses are $93. So they're operating at a $6 million loss in 2020. And I think I did go down here before and looked into, they have something further down here about how they've always been operating at a loss. Then they have endowments of $355 million. And, so who knows, maybe this is an accounting trick, but at the same time, too, taking it on face value that all these geniuses up there, they can't operate this deal, in the black. They can't operate this above board. They've got to lose money on what? On that building there, $86 million? Now, of course, it's all around the world, but even still, how much does it cost to run this building? Well, we know what it costs. It's these fat salaries of these quote-unquote intellectuals in there that are well compensated to come up with policy for what I believe and many others believe behind want to get done. So before we go to the video, let's just take a real quick look here at Hillary Clinton. Now, it's just one example, but you can do your own research and see if this is common or not, of how much the powers that be rely and lean on institutions like this. Okay?
Thank you very much, Richard, and I am delighted to be here in these new headquarters. I have been often to, I guess, the mothership in New York City, but it's good to have an outpost of the council right here down the street from the State Department. We get a lot of advice from the council, so this will mean I won't have as far to go to be told what we should be doing and how we should think about the future.
Isn't that very telling? Isn't that very telling? A lot of people, this went viral years ago. A lot of people thought this was a really facepalm moment, kind of jaw-dropping. I've been to the mothership. I won't have very long to go to be told, she emphasizes that, what we should be doing. I mean, Lord, it's my opinion that it's the people in these and behind these that are running things. It's not these talking heads. These talking heads are there to sell you their policy. That's what it is. But enough on that. Let's get right into it. Okay, so I skipped over the first beginning of this. We could play the whole deal, but it's, as you can see, an hour and 30 minutes with my commentary. It's going to get way too long. I try to pick out the juiciest parts, and even still, I have a lot of parts that I want to stop on. So I'm going to see if I can kind of keep this video, I don't know, this first one here, maybe about 45 minutes. Might turn out to be a little bit more, and maybe break this down in about 3 or 4 parts with everything that I want to say. So I've got my first, we're going to go to our first time stamp here. And not really a time stamp. I haven't figured out how to get those in here yet. But let's see what he has to say, and then we'll talk about it.
Sure. Is actually the mediating variable here. So let's take aggression, for example. Right? Is it true that men have more potential for aggression? Yeah, like duh. And nobody serious doubts that. But the fact that we have like half as much violent crime today in the US as we did a few decades ago, the fact that Singapore has so little by comparison to Malaysia, the fact that over the course of human history we've seen these massive changes in the expression of that aggression. Even in my own life, right? My kids, my boys have never really been in, I have 20, they're all in their 20s, they've never been in a physical fight.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Okay. So remember, this is what we're talking about here is his book, The State of Masculinity, and he's talking about culture and aggression. And I think he's going to get into here, or is in the next one? A little bit more of, well, let me play a little bit more and see.
Wait, how is that possible? Given how I grew up. This is amazing. And so what that means is that even if it's true that proclivity, you use that word very carefully, I like it, proclivity differs, it doesn't mean it will necessarily be expressed.
Yeah.
That's where culture comes in. And so that's actually acknowledging the role of biology doesn't make culture.
Okay, so this is where he's going, that men have a stronger proclivity towards violence than women do, but it's culture that forms it. Okay, and he had mentioned there, I do believe. Did he mention it there? If he didn't, or did I go too far? That what that they were basically saying, or he was saying, is that as men are freed up, and there's kind of a surplus of men, that it is predicted and seen, and it had been studied that violence would get worse. Because when you have a surplus of kind of useless men around, they're going to kind of have to find something to do. But we haven't found that. That actually, that's what he said there about Singapore and Malaysia, that they have actually gone the other way. It's gotten way less. And then he's even saying the same thing about us over here. Now, this is my issue starting with these guys, and it's going to get worse and worse, but this is where it really starts. He talks about this in a vacuum. I just showed you, this is a high academic that do deep research. That's all these people do at the highest levels of what's going on. It's been very, very, very well known for quite some time that the going by stats on crime, we've had area after area, because of shortage in policing, people don't want to go into policing, that is refusing to enforce certain crimes. I believe there's areas in California, this isn't any kind of conspiracy theory, it's very easy to confirm, that they quit prosecuting shoplifting, for example. They've quit because of racial disparities, giving certain tickets on public trains, on giving certain minor traffic violations. And, he's talking about violent, of course. I'm not talking about violent there, but even still, you can definitely, there were stories I followed years ago, and these might be subjects of other videos. I'm sure you could search them and find them yourself, that in certain jurisdictions in Louisiana, around the New Orleans, Baton Rouge area, they were so overwhelmed that they had thousands of rape kits. Those are the medical tests that they do for women after they have been raped to be processed to get DNA evidence, that were sitting on shelves for years that could not be processed because of a lack of manpower or incompetence, whatever it may be. That's going to affect your crime stats. I mean, just on face value, these guys, and I will touch on this again and again, that I find very exasperating. It seems not just them, but almost everybody today, if they don't have a study or if the stats say, then this just must be what it is. But if we just looked at what happened here in 2020, the way that cities were being burnt to the ground, and I mean, how much did that affect the stats? Because we know that thousands and thousands of people that should have been charged or, at least investigated, got off scot-free. How much higher just in that would crime stats be when you claim right away that, violent crime is going down? And it's also been all over the media in the last couple of years since COVID that murder rates and violent crime has been skyrocketing in many major urban areas. So is that true? That just because your boys haven't been in a fight, well, who are your boys also as well? I'm sure that has been going down. There's a big anti-bullying campaign that nobody is allowed to raise a hand to anybody anymore. I can take that at face value, but even still, look who he's speaking of. You saw the Brookings Institute. What the social circles that he must run in. I don't think at the whatever it may be, $50,000 a year private school, you're going to see too many of them throwing down. And this is supposed to be evidence. But even beyond that, is this is going to be a constant theme as well. If you kind of pay attention to this and get it on your radar, that it's always presented the things that are happening in society, the trends, the current culture is just kind of organic through modernity on its own. There's nothing being planned of this. Is it really that we're just evolving and people are getting nicer with these excess males being around? Or is it that they're being completely, totally emasculated, frustrated, in combination with not reflecting proper crime stats, etc., that you can paint this picture? But anyway, let's get on to the more juicier stuff here. Go to 24 minutes here.
Because you're male, you're going to be like this. And because you're female, you're going to be like this. And first of all, we miss the importance of culture, which hugely affects how we actually express our differences. And secondly, it misses the fact that those distributions, depending on the thing we're talking about, they overlap a lot.
Yes.
Right now, some overlap more than others. And so the reason people don't like this conversation, and they're right to worry about it, is because in the wrong hands and historically, the invocation of biological differences has been used to oppress women. It's been used to say...
Now this just drives me up the wall and I see red. And this is why my first couple of videos here, I'm dedicating it to exactly this, debunking this historical narrative of what he's saying, that the proclivities, the differences in men and women, that men are more inclined to be aggressive or violent. He doesn't say it here specifically, but traditionally men were more logical, and that's why they could work in this and women couldn't work in that, etc. And so if you go with these biological proclivities that tend to certain ways, and you only do that, it becomes very dangerous, because these were used as an excuse to oppress women throughout history. And look at how emphatic he is on this, that this is an unquestionable, solemn truth for all of time. And as I started to say, that's what I'm starting to dedicate my first videos to, of showing that this is bunk. Women were not historically oppressed. because of their proclivities. The proclivities were greatly exaggerated in a pre-modern era when 80% of the people lived in an agrarian society, when you could not call 911, when you could not have a cesarean, when you did not have birth control, when you had to wash clothes by hand, when the vast majority of jobs available to men were hard, back-breaking labor jobs and women could not go out of the house and do them. They would drive men into an early grave. So therefore, they organized a society as such that made much more sense at that time. And in fact, I will show in my videos coming up that many of the measures that they purport as proof of oppression of women were actually measures many times to protect women. Okay, and this may sound outlandish to the uninitiated, but it is not at all. You can actually make a very strong case if you want to play the victim narrative, which I don't. But if they want to play the victim narrative, which they do, it has been men who have been much more exploited and oppressed by other men, and even at times by women, than women have ever been. Women have always been a protected class and pedestalized somewhat. This is where chivalry came from. This is where women and children first came from. That didn't come out of the modern era. That came out of men that were willing to give their lives. And this just makes me see red when I see these academics, and then I see even almost everybody in our space never push back on this. Never, whoa. So are you saying that men were, these terrible oppressors for all of history until just very recently, when women had to rise up and make them behave properly and not beat them constantly and rape them and subjugate them and turn them into slaves? Because that's what they're saying, and these guys are agreeing. So then how are you ever going to talk about, well, maybe we should do something for men if men aren't faring well? Because the logic goes, if you can follow me here, well, the only reason now they're acting decent towards women is because women made them through feminism, through organizing in feminism. They forced them, they put a gun to their head to behave properly. And now men aren't faring too well. Well, it looks like they were pieces of excrement for all time. Because of under this fair paradigm that we're making them do now, they're not doing too well, then I guess they always must have been crap. Can any of y'all listen and see how important that is? That this has to be debunked because it's not true at all. And the discourse will never advance to any acceptable level as long as we have this insane narrative that women were oppressed. And he didn't say the word brutal, I don't believe, but you can tell by his emphasis that he might as well have said it. Women were brutally oppressed through all the time. I would love to find it for future videos, the actual sources, but it's going to take me so much research. I'll probably have to spend hours going back through videos and interviews, but a men's rights activist out of Canada by the name of Karen Strong, she did some excellent videos years ago talking about how she did a deep dive, and to find this, I believe she had to go to provincial museums and go back into historical archives on microfilm to find the historical evidence, for example, that in the 1400s there were women as registered blacksmiths, that in areas like Scotland and Ireland, making of spirits, whiskey, scotch, these were solely the domain of women, as in it was so strict that men weren't even allowed to participate because it was reserved as the type of women that, or type of work that could be very lucrative for women. Men respected that. They understood it. It became their craft. Textiles or many other type of things. They always worked. They always had a way, but they couldn't go out into the workforce and be independent, so to speak, because survival depended upon it. If you had to raise 5 children without birth control, without cesarean, etc., half of them died at a young age and got sick, and you had to attend to them and kill the chicken and pluck it at home. You couldn't go to a convenience store. You had to have divisions of labors and strict protections. It wasn't the namby-pamby easy world of today, which is going to be a common theme that you hear this man talk about. that it's all just about choices and it's all just about how much money you can make. And that's the measure of what is quality. And as far as standards, continuing society, a healthy functioning paradigm, respect, morality, you don't really hear any mention at all. But let's get on to our next time here.
Absolutely. But it's another thing to say, well, we need more fighter pilots and we'll lower the standards so that you can be a fighter pilot, and because we need to
I think
until we get to...
So they're talking about making everything equal and everything here. Rollo's using the example of fighter pilots. Well, it's okay if you want to make things equal so women can become fighter pilots, but to take it to the point of where we have to have 50%, that's going too far.
In the case, just speak specifically on this. In the case of infantry, you would have to lower the standard. In the case of fighter pilot, you would not. It actually, being a fighter pilot actually.
Okay, this is really what I wanted to get to this part for here. Now, he is ex-U.S. Air Force. Okay, now once again, just in the discourse here, this is why I really want to concentrate on Mr. Richard Reeves here. But these two gentlemen here don't help the case at all. They don't do themselves any justice in any way, shape, or form. So just listen to this. This is what he did. That you wouldn't have to lower the standard for fighter pilots. And I'm sure they aren't. Now, I'm not a fighter pilot. But I don't think I'm wrong if there's something called G-forces on you. I mean, even talking about proclivities of men having more testosterone, which everybody here is going to agree on, and being more inclined to aggression. If you're a fighter pilot, you're fighting, right? You're trying to kill an enemy. And an enemy is trying to kill you. Testosterone is widely, I think everybody agrees on this, associated with aggression, assertiveness, bravery, even logic. So that wouldn't come in there at all when you're in the middle of a dogfight, that men might perform better just for that. And like I said, I mean, G-forces, to my understanding, can be very, very strong. They can make you pass out. That is definitely a physical requirement. I mean, I think he goes on, I cut it off here, but I think he goes on to say, his only measure is a smaller person is better in a fighter plane. You don't need he says a 6'8" guy is not going to want, you don't want a 6'8" guy in there. So just because you're smaller and going to be able to do it doesn't matter if you're a woman or not. And then, on top of this, I've been following stories for years. This could be another topic for a video of the general chaos that is being created in recent decades of the mass entry of women into the armed forces, as in cheating, breakups, hookups, illegitimate pregnancies, and even planned pregnancies. So let's say we keep on with this agenda and we get to 40% of women fighter pilots. And then we have to go to war, where you're putting hundreds and hundreds of planes in the air. And now to that 40% of your force, you've got 30% of them that have got to be on pregnancy leave. Is that a good idea? At all? Who would think that's a good idea? How could you not think about this? How would this not occur to you? And I'll tell you why, because everything has become feminist. Nobody can really bring it back and call it what it is. We're only going to take the conversation back to a certain point, but then we still got to be scrambling to make things equal so we don't appear that we're sexist or discriminating or some kind of other ridiculous nonsense. Just insane how that is completely omitted, and then we just carry on the conversation. And why these gentlemen can't think to or bring something up like that, beyond me. But it's not a strong showing. I'll tell you that. Let's see if they have anything else to say on this one. We'll jump on to the next.
You are better off being a smaller human being to be a fighter pilot. 6'8" people do not make good fighter pilots. So actually, for that case, to be a Navy SEAL, no, it would be you would definitely have to lower the standard, especially for things like push-ups. You would have to lower the standard for women in order to do that, but not to be a fighter pilot. So that's the reason why I don't think in that.
Okay, that's about all. Just kind of recapping what I already said, what he was going to say. Sounds like nonsense to me. But I'm sure they would tell me I've never been in the armed forces, so I can't say anything. You know, it's the same type of logic that, you know, I guess I'd have to be a cheetah to study cheetahs, right? I mean, it's just the discourse has become so absolutely foolish. And that's why I wanted to weigh in and have been weighing in for years. I don't care if only 3 people ever end up listening to these deals. It's very cathartic for me, and at least I got it off my chest. So let's listen to the next one.
Got into this a little bit on Dr. Phil, but never really went into it. I criticized Jordan Peterson for saying that the reason that only 5% of engineers are women is because women are more into people and men are more into things, right? There's this people-things distinction in psychology.
He pulled that from Dr. Pinker too.
Right.
Yeah,
And it's true. And it's true that on average there is that difference between, you know, men are a bit more into things and women are into people. But that's one of those distributions overlaps a lot.
Yes.
Right. So that's why my sister-in-law is an engineer and my son is an early years educator.
Okay. So first and foremost, right here, right, the proclivities of what he just said of, you know, Jordan Peterson talking about men more into things, women more into people. And I think I've already mentioned, I'll probably keep mentioning it again, these guys always have to go with, you know, the stats and the data, as though you can't have bad stats and data, depending on who did it and for what motivation, etc. I mean, according to these types and so many people today in society, just think about this. You shouldn't be able to find anything that's worth a damn in any ancient book of knowledge, whether it be the Bible, the Quran, whatever philosophical ancient texts come out of China, India, wherever in the world. Okay? Plato, Socrates, etc., because they didn't have any Brookings Institute. They didn't have any accredited universities with PhDs studying everything and could take huge scientific sample sizes and polls over the telephone and whatnot. And yet today, myself included, there's still tens of millions of people worldwide that I am sure will tell you that they read those books of wisdom and say that is spot on completely. That's as true as ever. You know, as if you can't, and he even goes on, or I think he did already say, did he not, that is why his sister is an engineer and his son is in early childhood education. But they always want to pick and choose when they can use anecdotal evidence when it serves them, or when it's going to be a study, well, the data doesn't say. But in all honesty, anybody that's listening, sure, you find the odd woman here and there. There's a woman over here where I live that her and her husband own a small engine machine repair place that does lawnmowers and whatnot. She's been working there for years as a mechanic and does a great job. Do you see it? Do you see it in any significant percentage at all? That women like to tinker with things, take them apart, build, etc. as hobbies. And of course, they're going to tell you, no, it's because they've been programmed this way. You know, I'm sorry, I just don't buy any of that crap anymore, because we have now had decades of pushing women to be strong and empowered, to do everything that a guy can do. And as Jordan Peterson will also tell you, then the societies where they've made things as equal as possible through as much help as possible, like the Scandinavian countries, the disparity's only gotten worse. Women go more and more into people-oriented things, and men go more and more into things-oriented things. I guess I can go ahead and put this on big screen. That'll help me here quite a bit. Should have done that from the outset and dropped the ball on that one. But anyway, lost my train of thought a little bit there. Let's play him a little bit more, see if he jogs my memory.
Because they overlap a lot. And I was recently convinced by some evidence that I cite in the book from Rong Su and James Rounds, some psychologists, who said that under conditions of total equality of opportunity, to
about
use
30% of
about 30% of
yeah.
engineers would be women, and about 30% of nurses would be men, and that feels about right to
Correct.
me.
Yeah.
So there you go, right? Like even right there, and that feels about right. And then he heard it from a book. You know, he got it from a book from somebody. I'd like to see their data. All right. Well, we don't know that. Remember, because the data, they're all coming out of these hard left core leaning institutes, like where he comes from, where their worldview is very much inclined to that. We've seen this for if you bathe in this type of information as much as I do, you know, you'll see just a plethora of reports and studies on studies of how they completely ignore data that doesn't fit with what their agenda is, and bringing the data that does, whatever it may be. But even still, beyond all of that, is this desirable? Is there any qualification that even if you get 30% of women engineers, like you said about his sister, I believe, okay, she's an engineer. How successful? What kind of engineer? Is she a mechanical engineer? Is she inventing things? Does she have her own firm? Is she going to work at it for 10, 20, 30 years like commonly men do and build it up and mentor other people? Or will she dabble in engineering? Maybe she's a very smart woman, not taking anything away from her. Maybe she's very good at it. But she'll dabble in it for 5 years, 10 years. Then she'll get her baby rabies and marry another engineer that's making very good money and, go and settle down. And it's nothing against her. It doesn't mean that she should be prohibited from it. I'm not saying that in any way, shape, or form. But they're promoting this. You'll constantly promote this. This is a great thing that we've got to get. Great for what? For who? For her personal pleasure, maybe. Is it really going to give her even long-term satisfaction and success in her marriage as a mother, as a wife, as an individual? And is it going to add to society in any great significant way as well? And how many men will not be engineers because women will have that spot that would maybe go and be maybe just as talented, just as smart, but they're not going to get pregnant. They will go and work that job for 20, 30 years to provide for a whole family and then maybe open up a firm. This isn't talked about. It's just talked about, well, if people get their choices and they can get into it, then everything will be a lot better with no qualification whatsoever. And once again, the guys here don't push back at all on it. All right.
Right? Because it's not 50%. And we're not going to socially engineer society to make sure that everything's 50%. And some will be less than that, by the way. So maybe deep sea fishing, for example, won't get 30%.
Yeah, there's a great one. Huh? Oh, you don't say. You don't say. Deep sea fishing won't get 30%. Do you think it'll ever even become 1%? How about nobody's ever concerned about that, right? They want the prestigious high-paying jobs that largely you can do in AC, heat in the wintertime, right? Get your lunch breaks. Don't have to really get dirty. Don't have to worry about getting engineered. But is anybody clamoring at all for equality and all of the other things that make society go? Like you just said, deep sea fishing. I often make the point, now that we've had feminism for 170 years, from 1848, from the launch of the Seneca Falls Conference and the Declaration of Sentiments, of this push for equality where women, if we just took away all of the patriarchal oppression, you just let women be, they will rise to be 50-50 in everything. And not only will they do it as good as the men, they will even do it better. And we'll have more equality and more compassion. Society will run much better. We'll have less war, et cetera, et cetera. That is the promise. That was the promise. It is to this day. So in 170 years, can anybody show me just one deep sea fishing vessel, framing crew, or masonry outfit, or linesman crew, plumbing outfit, electrician business? I can go on and on and on in the trades that are all women, and not just all women, but are actually very solid towards high-end performers and have made it go out for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Because I don't think there is one. I don't think there is one. That's out of, when you combine, just imagine, and you combine the numbers there of deep-sea fishing vessels and all of these different trades, we're talking opportunities for tens and tens of thousands of chances to find just one that fits the criteria that I just explained. Sure, you'll find a woman here and a woman there and a woman there and maybe two over here, and some of them, I'm sure, do great jobs. I'm sure some of them outwork the men. Some of them even make careers out of it. The number's minuscule. It's absolutely minuscule. Out of 170 years of effort, you can't show us just one, and that doesn't say something. But these type of ideas, these type of concepts, never enter into the conversation at all. But let's get on to the next one here. Talk about some women in politics. This will be good.
But the danger, again, it's an example. So it was the same argument when Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister in 1979 when I was 10. There was still people saying, well, like, politics isn't really for women. You know, they're not as interested in status. They're not as obsessed with leadership. They're not into power in the same way. And at the time, only 5% of British MPs were women, right, when Thatcher became Prime Minister. Well, Margaret Thatcher, I think, was a pretty good counterexample to all those stereotypes. And now...
And a politically conservative one.
Yeah.
Right, and now a third of MPs are women. The Conservative Party is the only one that's majority male. And so it's like, well... If there was something different between men and women that explained that there are different appetites for politics, is 5% really a realistic explanation of that? No. So you get these. So on the one hand, you get people saying women.
This is just absolutely astounding in its obtuseness, in my opinion. Absolutely astounding. Is he really that obtuse, or is he that dishonest? As this happened just in a vacuum with no other influences on it at all. So if you didn't follow what he's saying, right, Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister of Great Britain back in the 1980s, and now it's gone from her time of 5% representation of members of Parliament up to 30%. And this is a reflection supposedly of just organic growth. I guess he doesn't even say, I don't believe. Let's just play it a little bit more and see if he says. I don't think he does.
Women won't do this because their brains don't work like that. And men won't do that because their brains won't work like that. And they apply it to the whole population. And then other people who say until everything's 50-50.
Okay, now he just goes off the rails. He doesn't even address it. So why do you think that is, Mr. Reeves? Now, the implication is, oh, it's just because we made things more equal and that proves that women are just as good at it or this is what they want to do. Does it? Or have they been completely, totally socially engineered? And women have been given massive affirmative action programs. They've been given, there's been campaigns, vote for me because I'm a woman, do this for me because I'm a woman, I'm going to fight for women's rights. There's been a huge demonization of men, that if you don't get more women in there, this is what's going to happen, blah, blah, blah. It starts from as soon as they enter into grade school. There's now, if you've had any kids in school, I saw it myself when my daughter was in school, they've rewritten the textbooks, where I used to get 3 to 4 pages on, let's say, George Washington and the Founding Fathers, and then a paragraph or two on Betsy Ross, the woman that made the flag. Now it's the inverse. Pages on Betsy Ross and a few paragraphs on the Founding Fathers. And she was strong and empowered, and she overcame this, and this is about her sisters, and blah, blah, blah. And then when you get to the Founding Fathers, of course, they were slave owners, and they were misogynists, and, it's just been a tsunami of pumping up women to get them into those positions. He's presenting it as though, because we got rid of oppression, now we can see them flourishing. I don't think that that's the case at all. How can, even if it is the case, how can you at least not recognize that this is what's been going on? And once again, there's no qualification of, is this a good thing? It's automatically assumed to get 30% of women, 50% of women in this. That's going to be a great thing. What type of job are they doing? I'm not saying that they're doing a worse job than the men. Let's have the conversation. Is it a good thing for them to be dedicated as career politicians? I don't have a use for any of the politicians. In my first or the last video I did, the follow-up to my first one, presenting the evidence against the historical narrative of women always being oppressed, I have a quote in there from Queen Elizabeth talking specifically against this, in that she had said in 1870 that she disliked politics. It's a masculine realm, and women should remember their feminine propriety, and if they're to be good women, they should reject these type of masculine endeavors. And you have to see the video in itself and with the evidence that I'm going to present, because of course people will say, well, that's a one-off, that was just her opinion. It wasn't. It was the overwhelming amount of women that saw this back then and spoke eloquently about it in public, made literature about it. How once again, I'm at a loss of, this is just, it seems to be so childish, so superficially pushed through, as though it's an agenda with no real deep thought or analysis. And once again, these gentlemen here aren't aren't really helping it at all. But let's get on to the next one here at 40 minutes.
Good or bad? Answer, yes. It depends.
Both, yeah.
It
Hang on.
depends.
The context.
Here are these
Okay,
proclivities.
here we go.
When and how should I express them? When is it going to be helpful to express them? When is it going to be pro-social to express them? And the thing that a culture does is help us learn that.
He's talking about the proclivities of masculinity and how it's a culture that teaches men to be masculine. Okay, now if you know about Marxist, communist, socialist, and the current incarnation of cultural Marxism, of its culture, nothing is really innate, nothing is made by God, because the Marxists are rabid atheists. They absolutely hated all of tradition, the traditional structures. They saw them all as oppressive, and they needed to be all done away with. And then you would remake a new man with a new modern culture under industrialization and modernity, and that would create this new higher man, where the culture is just what teaches it. We're not biologically made that way by a designer. Okay, it's the man will be able to lift up other man. That's how you know these people are Marxists. It reminds me of the story of the duck test that John Allen Dulles was applied to the new president of Guatemala back in the 50s. I believe it was Eisenhower was the president then, that he was sent there. I think Dulles was about to be or already had become the head of the CIA, or he might have been Secretary of State at that time. I can't recall. You can look it up. It's a very well-known story. That he was sent down there to find out if Arbenz, the president of Guatemala, was a communist. And he came back and reported to Eisenhower, and Eisenhower asked him, so is he a communist? And he said, well, I put him to the duck test. He says, what is the duck test? He says, well, he says he's not a communist, but all his policies are communist. All of his advisors and the people he associates with are communist. His beliefs all seem to be communist socialist. So I say if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. So he doesn't say he's a communist, but he's a communist. Now we'll put the same duck test to these guys over here. They're Marxists. And it's not trying to just paint some guy buddy with a bad word. What I just explained here is, if your value system, like mine is, of understanding the absolute necessity of hardwired paradigms that, contrary to this narrative that women were oppressed and everything was ugly and never worked in the past, but actually we were made in a way to function, and we need to fit within that. And there's only so much wiggle room within it. And that is absolutely imperative to have a functioning, healthy society. Then you will should absolutely be able to understand what the danger is of this type of idea, when you can pick out these buzz terms time and time again of going back to culture and just materialism, and it's all just about the market and freedom and happiness, but what about the morality? What about qualifying the results of how it does for your society? There's nothing, and once again, these people are very, very deep thinkers. Supposedly, it's very ironic. They supposedly are. So what is it? You tell me. Either way, it's problematic. Either they're not deep thinkers at all, and they're just completely total frauds and incompetent, in which way we shouldn't be listening to them all, and they've got to go, or they're lying. And they're presenting a very superficial, shallow narrative, pretending to be on your side. But in all actuality, because if you look into things like Marxism, it was very deeply thought out about how they will overturn the order by exactly this bait and switch type of tactic of pretending to be on your side, take all your talking points, but just keep the fluff, and get rid of the meat, and kind of bamboozle everybody. Let's see if he has anything else to say here that's worth listening to before we go into the next one.
But it doesn't teach itself. It doesn't happen automatically.
downstream.
It has to be learned. And I had this quote from Margaret Mead, which I've used a lot because I
Okay, so if I lost you there because I was rambling too much, he's talking about masculinity, that it's very fragile, and with men, it's been studied supposedly. He's going to take a quote from Margaret Mead here again. So all these guys do is quote these other people's opinions, and a lot of times when you trace them back, you're like, there's no evidence behind it. There was no study. There was no empirical evidence. It was just somebody else's harebrained opinion. But they get canonized in these books of academia, and now it's become absolute, untarnished fact. So what he is saying here, that it's been proven supposedly that masculinity really isn't innate. It needs to be culturally taught. Sorry, not masculinitism. The nurturing masculinity needs to be taught. Okay, so we could say, what makes us civilized, what the good part of masculinity is. So let him finish here.
I've used it so much that I've got it basically to memory. Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, said, every known human society has rested on the learned, nurturing behavior of men. This behavior being learned is quite fragile and can disappear quite quickly under circumstances that no longer teach it effectively. And the reason I think I've got that committed is because every single word of that feels true to me, is that this idea of learned, nurturing behavior. And
you catch that? That's the second time. This feels true to me. So they're always wanting to go to their empirical evidence and the data says and this and that. But whenever he feels like it, he can reject what feels good to him and what doesn't feel good to him. And that's going to be the truth. And you don't get any pushback on it here once again from the two guys on the other side. Okay, but even beyond that, talking about this nurtured masculinity, is very fragile and can disappear at any time. The culture has to teach it. All right, completely game. You convinced me. How about the culture of having fathers in the home, like we had for millennia, en masse? How about a culture of not having weaponized divorce courts and family courts, where there's millions and millions of accounts now that are very, very credible, that have been falling for the years, of men that are just eviscerated? As he will talk later on about the suicide stats briefly of very well known men kill themselves at 4 times the rate that women do. But in the case of divorce, my understanding is it goes to 10 times the rate. This is what's going on now. So how about we install that again? But you see that they can't. There's no way that they can. Because that would be going back to the structure that oppressed women for all time. He already conceded that very emphatically there some time ago. And furthermore, that's not in line with the Marxist viewpoint. The Marxist viewpoint is, read it for yourself. Read the Communist Manifesto. That was written by Karl Marx. It's right towards the beginning. I haven't read it in a long time. It's not a hard read. That the structure of the traditional family is oppression. Okay? So he's saying, the culture needs to teach us that. What culture? The culture of transgenderism today? Is that what's going to teach men nurturing manhood that's very fragile? Nurturing who? Nurturing these men that are in, or teaching these men to be nurturing that are in drag queen story hour? To nurture 6-year-olds on their laps, if you get where I'm going? Is that what he's talking about? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? Steve's got some more nonsense to say here.
She means nurturing in a broader sense, by the way, like caring for the community, caring for the tribe. But like men can nurture, but it's more learned for men, right?
Okay, once again, fine. Yeah, have their fathers, uncles, grandfathers, teach them. Well, where's your program of how this is going to be learned? I don't think we're going to hear a pitch for that. But there was another little point in there, real quick one. What was it? I got to back it up here. That's not why I wanted to stop it.
And is quite fragile and can disappear quite quickly under circumstances that no longer teach it effectively. And the reason I think I've got that committed is because every single word of that feels true to me, is that this idea of learned nurturing behavior, and she means nurturing in a broader sense, by the way, like caring for the community, caring for the tribe.
That's what it was. Caring for the community, caring for the tribe. All right. So I think, and I'll stay steadfast on this, a huge part of caring is establishing order and justice and protection. Without a doubt. Like 150 years ago, if you stole a horse and you were caught, you knew what was happening to you. If you raped my daughter, you know what was happening to you. You weren't getting up in front of some effeminized judge and talking about how you were abused as a child, so it wasn't your fault, so we'll put you in a therapy program, and then you can get, 8 years and be out in 4 and then do it 4 more times, which we all know is happening in tsunami-like volumes these days. Right? So I mean, where is, I guess he would say, but this is where you would get him, and this is where he should be pushed back on. Well, yeah, you are right. These things are happening, although, he did say sometime, violent crime is down and this and that. Yep. I don't know about that, but even if you were to concede that point, then lost my train of thought there. He would say that that's exactly why we need to do something about men and boys. Well, maybe if you had been pushing this crap from the beginning, we wouldn't have to, because they would have had their proper role models like they always had. We would have had that sense of male duty to protect and extract justice, and you had an honor bound duty to your community to be nurturing to them. But I'm sure they will never concede this. It's really just astonishing. But let's get on to the next one. This one is quite illuminating.
Why can't we find guys who will man?
Okay, he's talking about the women complaining about guys not being masculine enough.
Man up and take responsibility.
Yeah, but why do you use that language? Though?
Well, the reason I'm using that.
I missed it. I got to back it up. He already dropped the bomb that I wanted to get to. This is just something else here.
Yeah,
that we're all engaged in. It doesn't do it by itself.
That learning process right now, I think, is at the root of why the conversation we're having, the larger conversation we're having, at least in the manosphere and really in popular culture now, is why are guys such pussies? Why are guys manginas right now? Why can't we find guys who will man up and take responsibility?
Yeah, but why do you use that language? Though?
Well, the reason I'm using that
because
I'm using that language because that's the language they use. That's the language of women on this show use. That's the language that they're using
it now, and I think as soon as you use a term like that, it immediately makes people react.
Isn't that just cringe like 100 tier? He just completely triggered that mangina and pussy. Why do you use that language? It sounds like a Karen. As soon as you use it, people react. I'm reacting. Why don't you get the hell off a think tank row for a little while, brother? Huh? Go work with a plumber for a few months or something as such. I mean, what world do you come from? And these are the guys. Remember on his page, that's why I went to his page, that he's involved in these initiatives for let's see if we can bring that up again here real quick. I can't recall exactly. What is he involved in here? Is it here or is it through the Brookings Institute? Oh, the levels of social mobility. Oh, here. He appeared on the Daily Show segment satirizing how complaints about the plight of the poor members of the top 1% distracts from the solutions for social mobility, exactly whatever that means. But, I think we can read between the lines. They're all about the working people. And is it in here? Yeah, the director of the Future of the Middle Class Initiative of Brookings. Right, working in intergenerational mobility, right? That means of bringing the poorer people up, right? Social mobility is coming up. Inequality and social change. This sound like a guy that's used to rubbing elbows with the working class because he's fighting for their rights in any way, shape, or form? Any of y'all hung around with any working class guys, any framing crews, any farmers, any diesel mechanics, any truck drivers? You see them getting triggered and reacting because somebody said pussies and manginas? And you're supposed to take this guy seriously? I mean, come on. Come on. And even like why can't you just say to the guy? Because this is what Rollo, he's getting lambasted really in his comment sections about not pushing back on this guy, just letting him push his feminist talking points. And, he's like, well, we're starting a conversation to have him come around like I did with Jedediah Bila and et cetera, et cetera. And of course people are, well, what did you want him to do? Humiliate him and fight with them and, call him names. No, you don't have to do that at all. Those are just copes. You're just hiding behind something. You can say it just like I'm about to say it here. Hey, come on, brother. We're all grown men here. This is common vernacular all the time between grown men. Much, much worse. Give me a break, brother. I mean, do you think that this Mr. Reeves over here gets all triggered, right, when he's watching the absolutely profanity-laced? I mean, damn, do you think he was writing letters to the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, about the top song of, 2022? WAP? Right? Talking about how wet this girl's coochie was and this and that. Next thing, I thought he probably thought that thing was great. It was women's empowerment. Right? But as soon as you touch anything on his sacred cow here, that might kind of ruffle his feathers. Well, why do you use this type of language? I mean, just tell the dude, say, brother, if you want to help with masculinity and proper role models and making things better, why don't you start with yourself? And get your panties out of your butt crack. And don't melt down because somebody said manginas and pussies. Get the... I can cuss up a storm myself, but I am trying to not do that on my channel at all. I don't want to. But this individual is making it real hard. I think I've been going for about an hour here already. I think I'm going to do one more and we'll call it that, and then I'll pick it up again tomorrow. So let's see. Let's hear the end of this exchange. See if he has any more nonsense that he has to say is worth listening to.
So let's just say they become more feminized. They become more. I was just reading that. We were reading that article last night on Access Vegas, and we're talking about how 63% of men are not in relationships, and like 37% of women are in relationships.
Okay, we're going to jump into the next one just a little bit here, up to 4220.
An interesting area of disagreement. So I think where we agree is the future is not and should not be androgyny.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
But
I agree.
But we do want equality.
Yeah.
Right. Not equalism, which is I think what you.
Why? And that statement there is just supposed to be taken at face value. Because once again, as I said before, you're not too concerned about equality and pushing for all this to have equal bricklayers and plumbers and machinists and mechanics when it comes to the female agenda. But let him go ahead. Bury yourself.
But equality without androgyny. So recognizing these differences, but still having equality.
And that's the trick, isn't it?
And I think, for example, and I cite this in the book, the fact that 40% of women now earn more than the average man, which is up from 13%, is a great thing. I think that the securing of economic independence to a very large degree by women in the last few decades is the greatest economic liberation in global history, and a wonderful thing.
Look at the heartfelt, emphatic way he stated that as well too. It looked like this was like a pledge that you would have to take to convince an organization that you want to join. Does it not? That it is a wonderful thing. Why? Well, because I said so. Because people have more money they can spend. And once again, it's not believable. I've said that already several times. Maybe it is believable. Maybe they are that dumb and that dense, which is very, very alarming, because these are the people that are in the ears, giving all the brain food to those that are running us. Or they're that duplicitous and that mendacious. But neither one is acceptable. Okay. That he doesn't, in what he swims in, he doesn't know enough about economics to know that just because now, as everybody's been complaining about my whole life, that you can't just have one breadwinner and have a good life and have somebody stay at home and raise the kids. You have to have two now. That it was just all chopped up. And now we've got more and more debt. We've got more and more pressure. We've got more social ills because of this. But this is a great thing so they can, buy more Gucci bags and take more trips to Phuket and Thailand and Machu Picchu and Italy. You know where once again, no qualifier. This is just gospel. This is a great, great thing. Let's hear some more nonsense. See who's going to end this up before I wrap it up.
It has all kinds of second round consequences.
There we
for
go.
how-
Oh, here we go. Yep. All kinds of second round consequences. They're all just kind of, it's kind of funny now, right? As you can see, look at his face right there. It's all, it just got messed up. Whoa, it took all of it. Else, society just went to complete total hell because of it. I don't know if those are going to be so good or not, but boys and men are completely screwed. That's why I just wrote a book about it. I can't connect these two dots at all. What do you think I am, like a PhD that works for the Brookings Institute? Jeez, guys, come on.
How we
That-
construct
That's what I was going to
Exactly
say.
right.
Yeah, there's
Right?
downstream
No,
consequences of that.
and people warned
Yeah.
about that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They were saying, you don't have such a massive social and economic change without consequences.
Of course.
And in particular, in this case, asking a very real question about what about the guys? What does this mean for men? But would you agree that the fact that women are now economically powerful and have secured a high degree of economic independence, that's a good thing?
I think as far as society is concerned, as far as like the economy is concerned, I would say yes and no.
Huge fail. Because once again, you don't know anything about economics, right? As far as society is concerned, right? As all these women that came in there went out and they went to mine gold, right? And they built oil platforms, like actually added wealth to the society. I mean, it's been said for years now. I mean, I think this came like 15 years ago that the American economy had become a service to the service sector based economy. It's not based on real anything anymore. It's all just smoke and mirrors of trading around all this deaded currency. A service to the service economy. I'm all tongue-tied now. An economy that is service-based to the service sector is you have masses of people that are giving pedicures and massages to servers in restaurants. See what I'm saying? Or being therapists to the therapists, so to speak. So he just just says like a kind of a dodge here to concede, so he can't because he just doesn't have whatever either the acumen, the clarity, the balls. I don't know. Just to say no. Especially from our point of view in this corner. That's all we talk about is how bad this has been for everything. No, it's not. It hasn't been a good thing. And once again, not advocating, it wouldn't be possible in any way, shape, or form, of course. How would it be? Now we do have a modern society. Even if it wasn't a service to the service sector, we still have, all kinds of retail jobs and et cetera in the way that our society runs that women can do and, probably will need to do, et cetera. But to just to be able to recognize and say, no, in the overwhelming measures, this has not been a good thing for society. Just straight up, well, it's a good and bad thing. It's good for the economy. In other words, so we can all buy more crap, more fast food, more porn channels, right? Go to the bar more, get more useless crap at Walmart and Amazon. That's just great for all of us in society, making everybody so happy. Nobody's on SSRIs, hardly at all. There's, just a touch of a meth epidemic and overdose problem, and there's no jerkaholics around, that are just hiding in their basement all day and hitting weed, playing video games, and then watching the prawn. No, that's no. Give me a break.
Again, I'm going to focus on the idea that there's downstream effects as a result of that. I'm not saying.
Well, I'll give him some credit there. At least he said, I'm going to focus on the downstream effects.
We send women back to the 1950s or whatever again.
And there you go. Right. I'm not, look at his face right now. He looks like he's in semi-panic. I'm not saying send women back to the 1950s. I mean, that was worse than the killing fields in the Khmer Rouge era of Pol Pot. You know, and they had all these floozies chained up to the stove, and the men were just screwing anything that moved, including their own daughters, and they were lynching the darkies everywhere, and it was the darky good. Whoever wants to go back to the 1950s, not me, please. Don't ever insinuate that I want to go back to that terrible time. You mean that terrible time that all those dudes on his intellectual think tank row over there will tell you that by every measure, societal measure, that is accepted by all intellectuals, such as infant mortality, gross domestic product, lifespan, divorce rates, intact households, buying power of the dollar. It was the peak of American society. Like every single sociologist and anthropologist agrees on that by those measures. I mean, we're fallen beings. That's my opinion. It's never going to be perfect, and you find all kinds of stuff to criticize. You will be able to every day for all of history. Human beings are not perfect. Not to say it was perfect, but you want to compare that to a little bit of what I described before of a few certain drug problems, crime problems, cities being burned down, racial grievances, gender, what the hell do they call it? Dysmorphia, on and on and on. Oh, I don't want to go back to the 1950s. That means we might have to stop Drag Queen Story Hour. How would the country continue? Who knows? Who knows? Hopefully these guys will have the answer on the next one. I think I'm going to leave it there. It's more than long enough for one shot here. Hope you guys got a little bit of an insight there of something maybe you didn't know before. Like I said, thanks for listening. It was just it's cathartic for me in any way. Maybe I'll get a little bit of engagement off this. And we will see you all soon.